Okay. Okay. Welcome everyone. Thank you guys for joining on this Saturday morning. My name is Michelle Tran from the City of Hayward, and we also have Linda Grant from the City of Milpitas, and of course Juanita Salisbury, who will be instructing your class and teaching you all about designing with native plants and succulents. So we'll go to the next slide. Okay, just a few housekeeping items. So we are doing a Zoom meeting. So by default, everyone is muted. We will have time for questions. I know some of you have already entered some questions. That's great. We love for you guys to be interactive and ask away any questions that you have. You can type away questions in the little chat box. If you see in the right there, it's a Q&A section. Feel free to type in any questions that I can help answer for any questions you have for the long conversion rebate programs or any water conservation programs for your city. Myself and Linda will be checking those, and we might answer in the chat box, so keep an eye on that. If you want something that you want Juanita to answer for you, you can also enter there and we'll answer it live. We will be answering questions at the end of the program, so stay tuned, and if anything pops up, feel free to enter that in there. So we do encourage questions. I know we have the raise hand there. You can raise your hand. There'll be time at the end of the program to raise your hand, and we'll unmute you and you can ask some questions. So, and also this webinar is being recorded. It'll be available after this is done, and a link will be emailed to you. And then the next slide. So about BOSCA, this represents 26 water agencies, including cities, water districts, water companies, all these agencies that purchase water from the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission. It represents agencies that provide water to 1.8 million people, or over 40,000 businesses throughout the Bay Area and Alameda, Santa Clara, and San Mateo counties. And BOSCA's goal is to provide high quality supply of water at a fair price. And they are also the ones that have organized and set up this webinar for us today. So our objective today is to learn about forest native plant succulents. We recognize that outdoor water use represents the single largest untapped opportunity for water conservation in this Bay Area water surface area. And outdoor water use reductions through the use of water efficient plants and innovative technologies can help conserve water and ensure that future water supply meets the needs of our communities. And of course, as we know, we are in a drought, so this is ever more relevant today. So thank you guys for being on top of this and being here today. Additional ways to save, as I alluded to before, many cities do BOSCA, including the City of Hayward and Milpitas, have these long conversion rebate programs, rain barrel rebate programs, and additional water conserving programs available to you. So if you are not one of these cities, please be sure to maybe call or email your department, local public works or utilities department, to see what is available to you if you're interested. Today, maybe as Juanita is instructing this class, you may be interested in maybe converting some of your lawn into a drought tolerant landscape. Most agencies have this long conversion rebate program available to you, including the City of Hayward. We have rebates available ongoing, and there's funds available. We also have a rain barrel rebate program as well, where you can get money back for installing a rain barrel. We also have water conservation fixtures available at City Hall as well. You can always call us and we'll be able to give you the low flow taps for the kitchen sinks, bathroom sinks, aerators, stuff like that. And we also are rolling out a program for you to monitor your water in real time. So if you have questions about that, please let me know in the questions box, or feel free to email me later as well. And these are, as I mentioned before, other BOSCA rebate programs. And the next slide, I think, is, I'll hand it over to Linda.
Great.
Yep.
Hi, everyone. I'm Linda with the City of Milpitas. So here at Milpitas, we actually work with Valley Water for rebate programs. So very similar to what Michelle described. We recently increased our landscape rebate program. So you get $3 per square foot of lawn replaced with drought-tolerant plants. Some of those plants you'll learn about today. We also do irrigation equipment upgrades and rainwater capture rebates for rain gardens and rain barrels as well. We also offer water conservation kits that you can email and request to pick up from our Public Works Department. And yeah, thank you, especially in this time of drought, of participating and doing what you can to reduce water. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we work with Valley Water, and they also have some landscape videos and resources for you guys to check out. Also, southbaygreen.gardens.org has some great landscape designs that you can actually borrow and utilize. So I know we did get a question about that. So please definitely check out that website, and you can get a template design from there. So we're excited for you guys to join this class and hope you'll join us at future classes. Here at Milpitas, we'll actually be hosting the winter edible garden class and the drip irrigation for beginners. But Bosca has lots of opportunities for all of you to participate and learn. Great, and please check out bayareagardening.org for more resources. Right. So we're super excited to have Juanita here, and I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, very good. Well, let's start from the beginning, shall we? Okay, so today's topic, we are designing with native plants and succulents, and I have a little mascot here with me. This is a Dudleya. We'll be talking about this particular native succulent later on. I am Juanita Salisbury. I have a doctoral degree in biopsychology, where I studied ingestive behavior, eating and drinking. And I also have a degree in landscape architecture. And I combine those two disciplines, and now I design native plant gardens. And you'll see why these two areas of my background complement each other. I do have a social media presence, Facebook and Instagram. You can follow me at the Primrose Way Pollinator Garden. And I also have a YouTube channel, Primrose Way. And if you want to get in contact with me, these are easy ways to message me through either platform. I'm always looking for volunteers, because we do have 5 pollinator gardens here in Palo Alto. We have the Island Drive Garden, the Arcadia Place Garden, Hopkins Avenue, Gwynda Street, and the Primrose Way Pollinator Garden on Embarcadero Road. And we're doing a new project there, which is along Embarcadero Road, our Pollinator Corridor project, which will link up the Primrose Way Garden with the Gwynda Street Pollinator Garden, adding about 17,000 more square feet of native plant habitat to Palo Alto. Gardens are always open. A lot of these plants, we're always trying to get labels on things. They're always open. So if you want to take a look to see what some of these plants look like, spring, summer, fall, and winter, great way to go and see how they look in the wild, and get an idea about the forms, the height, the colors, textures, and so on. So today, we're going to be talking about planning your design. And, you know, planning is the most important thing when you're doing planting, is like, have a plan. Don't just, you know, wave your arms and say over there or over there and put one here. Always good to have a plan, because then you know quantities, you know placement. Plans help you save money. So plans are good. We're going to talk about how to create a plan by how do you measure your yard. If you want to do a plan yourself, how do you measure things in your yard? This is key to have a really good, accurate map of your house and your site. And then the placement. How do you place plants? We're going to talk a lot about planting and plant function. You know, plants are of course decorative, but that's not all that they do. And then some propagation. You know, you can buy plants. You can get them in these handy 4-inch pot sizes, which are much easier to plant than a big gallon or a 5-gallon or 15-gallon. But, you know, if you want to save some money, there's plant propagation that you can do. How can you generate more plants for yourself? That saves money. Maintenance, how do you maintain these? And then some final thoughts, kind of wrapping everything together. And I do feature my own macro photography and other photography on these slides. And because I do like the living creatures these gardens support. Now, as a designer, this is my mantra: form follows function. Okay, what do you want your plants to do? Well, we want them to save water, obviously. But there are other functions that plants have. So they can create shade, they can screen, they can become ground covers, they can be accent plants. Okay, those are sort of the decorative aspects, but they also have certain attributes. You can have low water using, money saving plants. You can have these low maintenance plants that really don't require a lot of hands-on care. You want things to be long-lived, so you're not always replacing plants. Do you want them to be fragrant? Do you want color? What kind of textures do you want? What kinds of forms that you want? So these are all attributes that you may want to consider when choosing a plant. And then what's your style? You know, are you formal? Do you like things that are very symmetrical and aligned? Or are you more informal? Do you like the cottage garden look? Do you have a traditional look versus a modern or contemporary look? So these are considerations when you're planning your garden. So let's talk about some functions here. So outdoor irrigation can use up to 50% of outdoor water use, or lawns rather, can use up to 50% of outdoor water use. Lawns really, if they're non-native sods, they can really suck up the water. So when you're designing things, use the function-based decision-making. So when you're trying to decide, ask yourself, you know, what's a lawn used for? What is this? What is its use? What is its purpose? Okay. And this is a great way to help you make decisions. People are like, how do I decide? This is the easy way. Ask yourself, what does it do? Okay. Also, you know, if we consider, you know, where are these people? They're all congregating on the patio. So what does a lawn do? It's a place where people walk. All right. In this case, a little girl is having a run, but basically it's a place where people can stand, although they're mostly congregating on the patio. We also know that lawns, if you intensely mow and spew greenhouse gases into the air, you increase weeds and lawn pests. So lawns can be problematic for a number of different reasons. So again, think of the in terms of function. You know, do you just want a big swath of green that's pretty low to the ground? You don't need grass to do that. There are other plants like ceanothus. So just a quick example here in terms of function. So instead of a big piece of grass here, a big piece of lawn, we have a Ceanothus horizontalis, Yankee point. This is evergreen, which means it stays green all year long, about 15 inches tall, spreads nicely, grows pretty rapidly, has beautiful blue blossoms in the spring, and can do well in sun or part shade. So you have alternatives. You don't have to choose a lawn. You know, you're not walking across this. You want something low and green, nice and glossy. Ceanothus species are a really good plant. So just to wet your whistle here in terms of decision making. So let's talk about the process of how you measure. And you know, what you want when you're doing something like a plan is you want a plan. You want something that makes it easy to sort of draw things out And this is an actual map that I hand drew back in the day when I mapped out people's yards. I use graph paper. I would put it on a clipboard. I would lay out a measuring tape along the house. This is the house here, in one direction and then another direction, so that I could measure things to scale. And what I mean to scale is like 1/8 of an inch equals a foot, 1/4 inch equals a foot. In this case, it was 1/8 of an inch. You can see the little squares here. And those are all 1/8 of an inch. And so that way you have a scaled plan. And so you lay out your measuring tapes, leave those in place, and then measure everything. What's along the measuring tape at 9 feet 6 inches is where the house juts out, and so forth. They're like windows, doors, which way are they swinging? You know, an accurate plan is the start of where you begin. If you don't have an accurate plan to start with, nothing will work because errors multiply and have that ripple effect all the way through. So this is the key. So you want to take inventory, note on the map locations of things like edges of the lawn, where the fences are, any sort of hardscape like patios, downspouts, existing lighting, any sort of notable features like retaining walls. You want to know which way north is. Okay. So again, when you're measuring, note where things are. This is what I mean by a soft tape. You just pull it out, leave it in place while you're measuring. That way you don't have to move it around. And note where things are like downspouts, electrical stuff, hardscape, and so forth. And then when you're done, think about your functions of the space. Overlay that initial map with translucent tracing paper, and then just kind of very generally show functional areas. You know, if you're starting from scratch, like where you want your patios, your fire pits, your dining areas, and so forth, and very generally show green areas, and then circulation with these double-ended arrows. How do you move around the site? Okay. And then remember, form follows function again. And you can overlay on top of that. You can see we've overlaid on top of our movement areas and kind of like laying out some general shapes for patios and steps down and where the doors were, and generally showing you where your planting areas are and where your trees can go. Start with trees. So people are like, how do I begin? Start with trees. Trees are the big things. So you want to get the big stuff in there, and you first, and you want to just show them sort of generally. And then you can throw another piece of tracing paper on top of that and show generally where you can mass in shrubs and perennials. So little finer line for the perennial masses in there. And this just shows how you can measure out things like furniture with a scale. This is a 1/4 inch scale graph paper, so that you can really size things to what you have for use. So how big your couch is for outside, how big your dining table is, and so forth. This shows you very generally how to lay things out. And then once you have things kind of generally figured out, then you can get down to the more specific things like specific species. Okay, and so pull myself out of the way here. So when you're laying out plants in your planting areas, because you want to get in there and maintain them, you may want to consider first showing a pathway through there, a couple feet wide, so that you can just kind of get in there, do your weeding, you know, so you can reach in there, pull out what you don't want. So put a pathway in first, even before you're starting to think about shrubs so much. And then once you have a plant palette, and we'll talk about that in a moment, then you want to start adding in those plants. You want those in as showing as circles at their mature diameter. Okay, and you can do that because you have a scale plan. So you can figure out what's 8 feet wide, what's 4 feet wide, and so forth. And this will help you with spacing, because you don't want to cram things in and get them too crowded. Otherwise, it's going to be a nightmare for weeding and kind of keeping the plants from crowding each other out. So what you want to start with, your big things, again, trees, then your big shrubs, and then work your way down to your smaller things like, so bigger shrubs and then perennials. And the way that you space things out is that you show your circles just kind of touching or somewhat overlapping about 25% or so. Odd numbers are great for that informal look. If you want things to be more formal, you can go with even numbers for symmetry. But that tends to look a little bit more artificial, but that works for, you know, a very formal or super modern look. And you can plant underneath later on when you have open spots. But this is good for a beginning planting plan. And this is how you do it. So that helps you, because what I meant about plans and quantities, so you can go in and add up the numbers that you have. So you can go in, there's 4, 8, 10, 11 of these, 3 of those, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of those. So you know exactly how many plants to get or to grow. And that once you know your plan, then you can implement it. And that saves you time and money, because then you're not guessing. Don't guess. If you have a plan, then you actually know. Knowing is good. Okay, so your sequence again, start with your large plants first, your trees, then your shrubs, and then perennials. And I always try to fit in as many trees as possible. And then your shrub layer should compose over 60% of all the plants. Okay, you want to focus on evergreen shrubs, and I'll talk about why in a little bit. And then in the remaining spaces, fit in as many grasses, perennials, bulbs, succulents, and ground covers and vines as possible. Aim for a mix of herbaceous, those ones that die back to the ground, and woody perennials. So you have a variety of things. And while you're waiting for things to grow in, try some annuals, like these tidy tips here. They can provide color and resources and fill up your seed bank. In the spring, when you want things to look pretty, and just kind of get you excited about what's coming up in the garden, to start while the shrubs are getting larger. So where do we get our plants from? So let's talk about California native plants here. Why California native plants? California is a biodiversity hotspot. We have almost 8,000 species of plants in California, some found nowhere else on the planet, and more than any other state in the United States. Many of our species are drought tolerant. They have figured it out over the millennia how to do with very little water. And our native plants are very special, and we'll talk about why that is. And we'll talk about pollinators too. And so here in California, we have 1,600 species of native bees, which are pollinators, more than any other state in the United States. And across the United States, we have 4,000 species of native bees. We're not going to talk about honeybees, those are not native. But we have such a huge number of plant species in California as a result of both our unique ecosystems in California. We have coastal prairies, we have oak chaparrals, we have redwood forests, we have deserts. So we have a lot of these different ecosystems with different plants growing in them. And we have all these different bees moving around all those plant genes. So these things combine together to give us our multitude of native plants. And so, but what are plants? So let's talk about the actual function of plants. You know, in our gardens, we have these as decorative, okay? But plants have this other function. Plants are the primary producers of food. They are the basis of the food chain. This is their actual function, biological function. So we take energy from the sun, comes down in this lightning bolt, actually in photon form. And plants transform that into energy, which other things then ingest. And so things like caterpillars take that sun's energy and transform it into protein. And then that protein gets turned into baby birds. Okay, caterpillars are the preferred form of food for many bird species to feed their young. So, and insects provide food for multitudes of other animals in the food chain. So this is the basis of the food chain right here. I call this slide my photons to protein slide. And as a rule, this is very specific, native insects only eat the native plants that they evolved with. Insects are picky. You wouldn't think it sometimes, but they like specific chemicals in plants. So if you have a garden full of non-native plants, you're not really helping baby birds and other animals in the ecosystem. They're actually starving in your garden. It's kind of a food desert for them because of the role that native plants provide. And pollinators, those bees, then provide another key role in helping animals access that sun's energy by helping spread genetic diversity in the environment. So they all work together. And so my approach to making plant decisions tries to get all these bits of information to help me make the best decisions about what these plants are actually doing and what their function is and what the roles they're performing in the environment. So remember I said I studied ingestive behavior. Plants, even though they are decorative, they're not exactly decorations. Their biological function is that they are food. That means that when you have these plants in the garden, that you will attract many native pollinators, other insects, and then in turn birds. Guaranteed, this is what happens because it's food. Who doesn't like food? So native plants then become critical in sustaining life. And when I select plants in the nursery, I try to get things that are already chewed on because I know that they're delicious. So why is it important? Again, because, you know, you put food out, you're going to attract pollinators and insects. It's a guarantee. And so understanding this particular beautiful function, you don't want to make your garden a trap where it's kind of like a dinner party where you've invited all the guests and then you kill them. You don't want that. Your garden then becomes really a critical piece of environmental goodness that helps sustain life. And so don't create an ecological sink, which is something that attracts organisms and then makes it easier for them to be killed. So again, these are the beautiful creatures you will attract to your gardens because of these native plants. So if you love beautiful butterflies and sweet little bumblebees, you know, this is the way to go. Okay, so somebody had asked about watering trees. So my approach is to, with these native plants, to enhance the connectivity and the complexity of the landscape, because plants support each other in the environment. And so the more the plants support each other, this actually leads to reduced irrigation needs. And what do I mean by how they support each other? So plants like oak trees will have these tap roots that go down into groundwater, and they pull it up. They're kind of like little pumps. And then through lateral surface roots and mycorrhiza, which are underground fungus that interact with the roots, a lot of these nutrients and water and information is shared. So that actually means that you can have water sharing that goes on, and they will actually use less moisture. So imagine then in your community of plants that you have a machine that when you add the right parts, the right plants, in other words, then the garden becomes a self-assembling living machine. And your goal, you want to start with a minimum of 20 native plant species local to your area. So what's a plant community? And so from the vegetation glossary on the California Native Plant Society website, it's a group of plant species living together and linked together by their effects on one another and their responses to the environment that they share. Typically, the plant species that co-occur in a plant community show a definite association or affinity with each other. In other words, they like each other. They're not killing off, one plant because they don't like it, but these like this particular community here, you can see everything is lush and thriving because these plants have worked it out over the millennia that they all work together. Okay, and probably a very specific community for insects as well. Okay, so consider those as well. You have to take those into consideration. So you're asking yourself, okay, now we've got the plan here. What do we plant? And my go-to place, and I've curated the information so you don't get overwhelmed. This is a great resource to find plants that are specific to your area. In other words, your plant community. It's calscape.org, which is done by the California Native Plant Society. It's an easy to use searchable database. You get information and resources. You can find California native plants and research the plants. Maybe that even qualify for some rebates. And then you can create a plant palette of trees, shrubs, perennials, bulbs, vines, and succulents. Calscape is great. There, you can search with the map. So you can do it by county or by city, very specific locations. Here I'm just showing California. I took a screenshot here, and they're showing 7,990 plants native to California. Lots to choose from. And, it's like, oh, how do I decide from there? Well, there are even better ways still to kind of hone it down in terms of what you want in terms of plant choices. So, and the way to hone it down is, because we know that plants are food, a better question then becomes, who do you feed? And so we know that plant species need insects, pollinators to survive. We know that speciation, and speciation just means, that plants that show different forms and varieties. And so you get different species kind of being generated from a certain genus. That happens more quickly when you have pollinators taking that genetic material and spreading it around, because that's what's in the pollen, are those male genes. Much faster than wind pollinated plants that just spew out tons of pollen and hopefully into the wind and it lands on something receptive. So when you have something biological moving the genes around, you get speciation, you get hybridization, all these things happening more quickly. And that tells us that biological factors may become more important factors than abiotic factors like climate, geology, and water for determining what to plant. And here in California, we have 1,368 species of butterflies and moths native to California. And so one of the best ways to decide what to plant is you can rank the plants based on the number of butterfly and moth species that they feed. Why do you want to rank them? Because when you have a plant that becomes kind of like a buffet for a lot of different species, that plant becomes a keystone species that supports many other organisms in the environment. Okay, and keystone species are where you want to start. So you're not overwhelmed if you can then rank things by the number of species that it feeds. So, but also important too, if you want to, save money by reducing water use, you ask yourself, okay, so I picked out these plants. How do I know how much water it uses? You can find out by using this really handy site, the Water Use Classification of Landscape Species, another online searchable database for plant factors of individual plant species. What that means is, compared to a lawn, which is 100% showing like water. What percentage of water use of a lawn, say, does this particular plant use? So, and they rank it as in very low, medium, high. So plant factor, that means 0 to 10% of a lawn's use of water, non-native lawn that is, 20 to 30%, 40 to 60%, and so on. So easy way to look up, say you picked out plants, now you want to see how much water they use. This is the spot to go to see how much water they use compared to a lawn. Okay, what to plant? Again, start with your keystone plant genera. So they form the backbone of habitat resources, food, shelter, nesting sites. Really, these are going to be your anchors to help not only other plants to survive, but to help other species to survive. So a key takeaway is to include at least a few keystone plants to provide for a resilient native plant garden, one that uses less water. Start with your keystone trees. Trees, trees, trees. Why trees? Trees help save water. So we know that trees absorb water and release it into the air, cooling and cleaning it. They form half the rain cycle. They filter it and so forth. Trees are great. And clouds often form more over forested areas than non-forested areas. So again, puts moisture back into the atmosphere, which is what we need. And they more than offset the reflection of the sun when they're bare by capturing carbon dioxide. So the net effect of trees is good. Second, you want to choose native shrubs, and you want a pro tip is to choose those evergreen shrubs that don't go dormant to keep your yard looking green. You want to rank by number of butterflies and moss hosted. That's how you determine what's a keystone species. See what fits in your site for size and location and water needs. If you don't quite see what you want, expand your area a little bit more. Don't be stuck on your county. Go to a couple of surrounding counties to see more specifically. Add perennials. Again, same search aspects. But let's talk about something juicy, literally, succulents. And from Wikipedia, the word succulent comes from the Latin word succus, meaning juice or sap. So I have a little friend here for my mascot today. Succulents. So a very broad definition, and there's a biological definition as well as a botanical definition, but basically plants that store water in their tissues, making them resistant to drought. And so based on that definition, we have cactus, okay, things with spines, Lewisia, which a very interesting plant. It has a beautiful kind of a tulip-like blossom. We have agaves, sedums, crassula, leptocyanes, dudleas, and maybe even bulbs, because bulbs are juicy. They store moisture in their tissues. Okay, probably not the botanical definition of a succulent, but if you're thinking of, and here's a native bulb that we have here, but they are moist. Okay, and when you have plants that are moist like this, that save water, that water becomes available to organisms that chew on them, like insects that then go on to feed the other organisms. So they are a great way to add stored moisture into your garden. And we have a lot in California, 188 succulents native to California. And I've ranked them according to species that they support, but really any of these will do. You generally want things that will not be killed off by frost, which can kill some of the desert species, but you have everything from the sedums here again to various cactus and so on. This is again a screenshot from Calscape. So one of the succulent species that I'm going to talk about are genera. are Dudleas. I love Dudleas. They're such great plants, and there are about 45 species of these. They do easily hybridize, so that makes the categorization of the types of Dudleas pretty difficult because they're kind of promiscuous out there in the environment. And you notice these pictures I actually took at Pinnacles State National Park. And these are literally growing on a cliffside. They are growing on a vertical surface. So what that tells us is that Dudleas like to be planted at kind of an angle so that water won't sit in the crown here, but drain off. Or to plant them in a mounded, well-drained rocky bed with some afternoon shade. So they really seem to defy gravity. And some of them seem to have an affiliation with mosses. And this is something that's being investigated. They're kind of symbiotic relationship with mosses and lichens. This is fairly typical of where you see them growing. Very interesting plant species. Most Dudleas and other succulents will go dormant to some degree during the summer. So most of them don't need any summer water, although maybe a light watering every few weeks, not on the foliage itself, but on the ground around them. And so these are actually ones that I have in my own home garden. This is Dudlea virens hassii in March versus just a few days ago. So still looks pretty good. It doesn't go quite as dormant, but you can see it's really fat and juicy here in March when it's got lots of water. Even adding water to these in the summertime won't make them look like this, fat and juicy, because they do like a cooler temperature to kind of suck up the moisture and really puff up. Also like this Dudlea bretonii, variety called Gremlin, in a pot that I have. That was back in March. You see it has a little bit flatter leaves. And the ones with flatter leaves dry up a little bit. This one hasn't completely dried up. Some of them completely disappear. People think, oh, it's dead. It's not. Some of them do disappear. So a lot to explore here in terms of forms. The finger form like this tend not to get as dry looking as the flatter, more rosette form like this. So a great looking plant, lots of different colors. I really like this kind of blue-green color with, look at those little pink tips there, just beautiful. Still looking good, you know, even here in October. For a lush look, now some people say, oh, you know, I don't want my garden to look like all dry and desiccated. Doesn't have to happen. If you add your succulents like this sedum that's growing here in the wild with darker colored evergreens like this Arctostaphylos here, this looks lush, okay? Dark green glossy leaves are things that people associate with tropical gardens, wet gardens. And you can get that look in your own home garden by using plants that have these dark green sort of glossy leaves. And these are from my own home garden. To case in point, things with dark green glossy leaves can look good all year round. And I took these pictures just a few days ago. If you like that look, aim for about 75% of evergreen shrubs that have these dark green glossy leaves to keep things looking lush and vibrant and juicy. Things like Vaccinium ovatum, this is our native huckleberry. Frangula californica, our native coffee berry. There's varieties with these big leaves. I actually grew this from seed. Prunus salicifolia, Heteromelias arbutifolia, the toyons. Ground cover, Ribes viburnifolium. These are green now with very little water. So easy to get that lush look. You don't have to make it look like it's a vacant lot. With everything dead and dying, it can look green and lush. So again, lush looking evergreen native plants. Oh, they also provide fruits. So Vaccinium ovatum have these great little huckleberries that you can eat. They're like little tiny juicy blueberries. And then Fragaria vesca, our native strawberry, has very, very tasty fruits. Again, evergreen plants look super lush, don't look dry and desiccated at all. It looks very lush and nice with a little water. Propagation, if you want to save money, don't be afraid of seeds. I grow a lot of things from seed. I do this cold moist stratification, which basically means putting things in wet coffee filters, labeled of course, so you know what it is. Put it into a plastic bag and stick it in the fridge. A great way to preserve genetic diversity, which is important, and it saves money. If you really want to save money, maybe you get some seeds you don't want to plant right away, grow these things out, which provides information about what these look like when they're baby plants, so that when you're weeding, you don't pull out the wrong thing. It also tells you how long it takes for some things to sprout. So here I am. You don't have to be fancy. I've grown things in paper cups, egg crates. Here's a germinated seed on a toothpick. So again, you know, once you see something sprouted, pot it up, that way you know it's actually sprouted. If you're interested in propagation of succulents, so with Dudleyias, let's talk about those for a second. Sedums are pretty easy, which is what I have here. You can grow those from a piece, a cutting like that, with a stem or a stolon there, with some that you maybe divide up from the rosettes here. Like there's a rosette here on this side, and then there's another one than that. You can divide this up. These will not grow from a leaf, the Dudleyias. There are some, there's a subgenera of Dudleyias that will, but most of them you need to start them from a rosette like that. That was the form, some you can do from leaf cuttings. That was the former subgenus of Hyacinthus. And this, you can try them from seed. I've heard it's easy. I'm trying it myself actually, but the seeds are really tiny, which can make it difficult. Some people cut all of the leaves off, or takes everything off and just leaves like the base stem, and then they can resprout from them. And that way, if you just leave the base stalk, you can then pot those up. So good ways to experiment. I'm not going to go into all of them. Lots of videos online, also from the California Native Plant Society, how to propagate. But propagation of succulents can be very satisfying. So maintenance of these native gardens are actually less than a non-native garden with a lawn that has to be mowed every week, weeded, watered. Basically, the easiest thing, keep the weeds at the bay, you know, just do a little bit at a time. Don't let them really get going. The best time to weed is when they just sprout, which is the spring. When you first plant these plants, irrigate them to establish maybe once or twice a week. You don't want to irrigate right on top of the plant. You want to irrigate just outside of the leaves, on the soil, not on the plant itself. And what that does is that encourages roots to explore and look for water. So you want the roots to really engage with the soil. Prune sparingly, you know, you want to control any sort of dried up dead material for fire safety. So definitely cut down the dry stuff. You don't need to fertilize. Amend very sparingly. If you don't have enough soil, I like to use in cactus mix. Mulch to control your weeds and help to establish the plants. And I like to mulch with leaves because that encourages fungus to grow in the soil, good fungus to help interact with the roots of plants. And if you don't like the look of how that looks, then I suggest what I call the skim coat of bark chips, which is basically 1 chip thick, which is also a money saver because you're not mulching 2 inches thick. You're just getting just enough to hold the leaves down. You can leave areas of bare dirt for nesting species of bees. 70% of native bees nest in the ground. Don't use leaf blowers in the planted areas. You know, if you do use a leaf blower, you know, use that on use it on the hardscape, the driveways, the walkways, and so forth. I always hand pick the leaves out of the plants and just push it onto the soil. Use an electric leaf blower so that you're not spewing out fumes. And then don't use pesticides, herbicides, or fungicides. What you find is you think, okay, what if these insects are eating this plant. Plant more if you're having a bit of an issue of a plant getting eaten, because that means it's good, tasty, you're providing a meal for things, and so plant more of it. And then what that does, you'll have more bugs eating it, but then you'll have more predators going after those bugs that are eating things, because it's every bug is another bug's meal because they eat each other. Irrigation. So some rules of thumb here. Basically, you want to plant during the fall, winter, or spring when the soil is cool. Planting season has started. I'm declaring open planting season. It's cool outside, the soil is cool, the rains will come. Plant small. I like to plant, because you have to dig holes, plant small. 4-inch pots are great. 1 gallon or smaller. You want to water once or twice weekly to just outside the root zone to help roots establish. Okay, roots will grow in the direction of moisture. And you want to obviously irrigate if there's no rain. Research the amount of water your plant is using, whether it's very low, low, medium, or high, with that website that I showed you. Mulches, boulders, and shade help reduce moisture loss in the soil. Once things are established, basically doubled or tripled in size, then you can start watering as recommended, kind of tapering back to, you know, if it's like no water at all, once every 3 weeks or whatever. Underground drip irrigation may only be suitable for those native plants that grow in seeps, okay, where there's a lot of underground moisture, which is not typical. And you don't want to water during hot temperatures when the soil is warm, because then you'll have warm, moist soil, which encourages bad fungus. And more in-depth information is, again, at the CalScape Native Plant Gardening Guide, which has a lot of more in-depth information, but these are some rules of thumbs to get you going. Again, avoid creating those ecological traps, okay, which reduces the reproductive success of insects. So a few things, you know, we connect habitats together to reduce isolation, because genes get spread around more easily. Reducing that light pollution at night. I like to use blackout curtains, motion sensors on outdoor lights, or yellow lights outside to keep insects from dying at nighttime. Leaving the leaves, many insects that become larvae or pupa overwinter in leaf litter. And when you're blowing that away, you're basically blowing away some bird's meal or those butterflies that you want to see in the spring. And when you eliminate the use of herbicides, pesticides, and fungicides, which actually get into the soil where native bees are nesting, that can help when you stop using those, because those chemicals get in the soil and they mess up the metabolism and the development of native insects. And reduce gasoline exhaust as much as possible by using electrical devices, because pollinators and other insects are using smell and vision to find their ways around, and the fumes actually interfere with them finding ways around in the environment. So some final thoughts. I know it's a lot to take in, but my main goal here is to inspire you to give this a shot, to go out there and try it, because the life that you will attract is amazing. And besides those ecosystem services that the plants are providing and that you provide, you're going to save money on water and maintenance, okay? And you'll start to see these and understand these interrelationships in nature, and you start to optimize that productivity of your native plant garden, you will find an abundance of life. And that hopefully will enhance your appreciation and also your understanding of your particular role in caring for all of nature's complex beauty, of which you are a part. And with that inspiring message, I'm happy to take any kind of questions.
Great, Juanita, thank you so much. We do have some questions. First, we have a question on what's the difference between a sink and a trap?
There's really no difference. There might be a slight difference in terms of what some biologists have, but basically those things are things that attract species and make it easier for them to be killed. And so a sink is basically, it's kind of like things going down the drain. And an ecological trap is where they literally can't get away. So it's, you know, basically the same thing.
Great. Then we have a question on, do you use a moisture probe to check the moisture around footballs? Do you recommend them? And any thoughts about monitoring water?
I have used moisture probes in the past. They are very helpful, and I definitely recommend using them. You know, try to get a good high quality probe. I tend to break them a lot because I'm not so good with mechanical things sometimes. But they are quite helpful, especially when you're starting out and you know you're kind of trying to maybe guess what's too much and what's too little. More water is generally not great. I think just, you know, when you can kind of stress the plants just a tiny bit in terms of like looking for water, I think that helps them establish more because the roots are going to be motivated, if they can be, to find the water. So a moisture probe can really tell you, is it too wet? You know, which is not always obvious from the surface, and sticking a probe in, especially like right outside the root ball, that can really tell you. Also right in the root ball, if the root ball is like super moist, you know that that's not good. If it's a little drier outside, that's better, because then you can be like, okay, I'm trying to get the roots to grow away from that root ball and really reach out and engage with the soil, grab onto the nutrients, and meet up with some other plants and say hello, share information. And plants do share information. Plants at one end of the garden, if they find out something, all the other plants will know once you have them all, the roots all connected.
Great. What are keystone trees and shrubs?
So like I mentioned before, keystone trees and shrubs are those plants in the environment that support hundreds or thousands of other species. So if you think of an archway with a stone blocks connecting in that arch, and that middle stone is what's the keystone. It's holding everything up. And that's what those plants do. They basically hold up the environment. And the way that you determine what a keystone species is what the easy way is to determine, you know, how many other species are they supporting, you know, how many other blocks in the arch. And the easy way to do it is to find out how many butterfly and moth species that they're feeding. That's a biological way to look at it. But the keystone trees in our area, hands down, are the oaks. No other tree performs as many ecological functions as our oaks. Following those are the prunus species, and then you have maples and willows. Willows are huge, and you know, if you have a good wet spot for those, I would highly recommend willows. In terms of keystone shrubs, the big ones are the Arctostaphylos species, the Ceanothus species, the Eriogonums, otherwise known as buckwheats. Those are some that are really feed a lot of other insects, and also help share water. Another one that's really good, the Heteromeles species, the Toyon. Those are kind of like the backbone keystone shrubs in our areas. But really, if you have room, plant an oak of some kind that's native to your area. If you don't have room for a big oak tree, and they do get large, I would recommend planting a scrub oak, which is more like a big shrub. And then if you don't have room for something like that, Arctostaphylos is then my next go-to in terms of keystones.
Great. We have a design question. How to reduce the impact of a neighbor's garage.
What kind of impact are we talking about for a garage? What are they doing?
I don't know if the person who asked that question wants to raise their hand and elaborate on it.
Yeah.
You're still here. Okay, we'll get back to that.
Okay.
You see a raised hand. Do you have to water bulbs?
Ah, yes. Well, bulbs. So I love to experiment with bulbs. And I would say, so most bulbs like the Calocortis species, which are the Mariposa lilies, they don't like any water during the summertime. So bulbs are really a great way to use like zero water during the summertime. And there are some other species, maybe some of the lilies, that don't mind a little water. They can handle being a little bit more moist, as well as maybe some of the Camisonias or Camassias, the Quamash bulbs, which grew in wet meadows. So there's a range, but for the most part, the native bulbs, like the Calocortis, and some of the other bulbs, zero water during the summertime, because if the ground is moist and wet and warm during the summertime, they will rot. And bulbs they're not cheap, certainly, which is why I like to try growing them from seeds. So it's like one bulb can cost like $7 to $15, depending on species, because it takes a while to grow them from seed. So if you have time, and you want to spend 3 to 5 years getting something to grow, site them carefully. So like I have some lily species that I've been growing in pots, and those are going to be planted out into our pollinator gardens, and those pollinator gardens may get irrigated about once a week, just to kind of keep the soil from getting bone dry, but doesn't keep it moist and wet during the summertime. And that's plenty. But if you have like a place that goes bone dry during the summertime, those Mariposa lilies, the Calocortis, are great, certainly to put in. And no water use. You maybe want to clip off the seed heads and everything when they're done. It's kind of like daffodils in a way. People say, well, they dry up. Well, daffodils dry up, gladiolus dry up. A lot of bulbs dry up. This is what they do because they store all their goodness in their bulbs for next season.
Great. And the garage question, it looks like maybe Rox can evaluate on that. You're allowed to talk.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. My neighbor's garage is like 50 feet long and 15 feet high. He built this massive garage just beyond my fence. And every time I look towards the sunset, all I see is this garage. And I'm trying to figure out like what I'm starting a jacaranda tree there. I don't know if that's water wise, but I see them everywhere, so I'm guessing it is. And it's unattractive, and I'm trying to figure out how to make myself less angry when I look that way.
Native plants are the best, because the beauty that you will attract with the native plants will make up for any sort of ugliness that you see. That's my own philosophy. And so instead of a jacaranda, I would probably put in some oaks instead, some evergreen ones, if you have space for them, just because you will have butterflies. And, butterflies really can make you feel happier. They certainly, can transport you to a happy place when you see how pretty they are. And you can tell yourself that now you know better than him, and revel in that.
Yeah.
So plant some native trees there. Jacaranda, I don't believe that one is actually native. So if you're looking to kind of, you know, take your mind off your neighbor's garage, I'd plant some oaks because, you know, you will have butterflies.
All right, I'll look at that.
Yeah.
That's a great idea. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great, thank you. So next we have a question about, should you take the dead leaves off of succulents?
You know, you can, if they look kind of unattractive. So what succulents do is, you know, the leaves, these will get more like a stalk as they grow, and then the stalk will have like, the green part will be up here and the dead stuff will be down there. You can, you'll just have a big stalk that you see, but then you can like clip it and like let the end dry out for a couple of days and pot it up to get more. Or you can leave it, you know, those dead leaves, they're not going to puff up again. Not the really super dead ones at the bottom. You might find that there are little organisms hiding in there too. My approach to, you know, pruning, to removing leaves, to, you know, any sort of maintenance kinds of things, I try to be very slow about it because, one, I'll admit it, I am a lazy person, and I have a lot to take care of. So I want to see first if there's anything using it to live. If there's something living in there, I'll leave it. You know, because everything in nature has a purpose, even though it's not revealed to us right away. So look before you do anything. If it looks like there's nothing going on right then, you know, think, well, maybe I'll just wait another week, go and have some coffee, come back in a couple of months and take another look. If it still looks like nothing's using it, probably a good time to remove it. So kind of like the gentle, slow gardening approach, to kind of let nature tell you what it wants. And then if it looks like nature's saying, okay, you can remove my leaves, you know, I would say then go for it.
Great. Can you suggest plants with low water usage for the south side of stucco walls?
Yes. So south side, you're going to have some really hot sun. And so one of the plants that I've found that does really well, that likes to bake, is a plant called Abutilon palmerii. And you can look, that's A-B-U-T-I-L-O-N, Abutilon palmerii, and it's a desert plant. And that has a felty green leaf and a beautiful kind of orangey flower. So that one's a good one. Other plants that like to bake, you know, some Arctostaphylos will bake in the sun. Others, you know, I mean, if you go towards more of a, like plants that are a little bit south of our area, maybe even a desert variety that likes to bake in a hot, dry place, that's good. So, and you can also sort those on Calscape too, to see what's good for something super sunny. And yeah, so those are a couple ideas.
Great. We have a couple questions on if you have suggestions of nurseries to buy native plants.
Yes. So on going back to Calscape again, is that they show you nurseries that carry the particular plants when you find the ones that you like. And then you can go to the plant websites to see if they have it in their current inventory list. But for my personal selections, some of my favorite places to go to, so the grassroots